Hello and welcome again on behalf of Goldster and of Sporting Memories, a charity that's very close to my heart. Once again, we're blessed with a wonderful guest, and our guest today is Lady Mary Peters, probably the most inspiring sportswoman of our lifetimes. Mary shot to fame, if shot is the right word, with a gold medal at the Munich Olympics. In the pentathlon, and the pictures that we all remember, we treasure from our youth of that joyful face when she won in her big events was something that we treasure all this time. But her influence has gone on so much further, and I'm hoping that Ben is playing a little bit of a video clip that I brought out by now. Her influence has gone on so much further in terms of the Mary Peters Trust, which she set up not so long after her gold medal success in Munich. Her autobiography I've mined extensively for this chat. It was written by Ian Wooldridge in the 70s, so very shortly after her wonderful success in the Munich Olympics. She's also inspired a book called Passing the Torch, which is talking about women who've inspired in the world of sport over the last 20 or 30 years. Again, a wonderful book to have read. But above all, that joyful face when she was so successful in those 70s, those of us growing up in that time. And now the Mary Peters Trust, which really is the prime sporting charity in the whole of Northern Ireland, has really inspired so many youngsters to take part in sport, to succeed. There's Rory McIlroy there, to take part, to enjoy sport. And the legacy will
have had their hair done for this occasion. The Germans promised them that. But there's Mary, flanked by two other great athletes. This girl who's been an international for more than 10 years now finds herself the greatest all-round woman athlete in the world.
I'll cut it off rather quickly, but that was wonderful memories for those of us who remember watching it on the screen at the time, and I suspect for you as well also, Mary. But that bit at the start of the commentary, the Germans have allowed you to do your hair.
Yeah, and 50 years ago, and my dad was in the stadium. He'd come all the way from Australia, and I had no idea he was there. And it was magical moments, and the pride you feel when you hear the national anthem being played is just something unreal.
we're going to talk about the great success later on in this chat. But for someone who is so synonymous with Northern Ireland, and yet reading the book and so on, it's not actually where you were born or where you spent the first years of your life.
No, I was born outside Liverpool and in a place called Halewood, which incidentally, Katerina Johnson Thompson also came from that village. So it's amazing that two multi-eventers were born so in the same place, although a long time in between. But I just was very lucky to come to a place called Ballymena in Northern Ireland. Didn't understand the language because it's very unusual. And it was, at the age of 11, it was difficult. But the Northern Ireland people took me to their hearts from a very early stage. And I've stayed here ever since, although my family have long since left.
Ballymena, Portadown, in the 60s, I suppose. What was it like growing up in Northern Ireland at that time? Was yours an affluent childhood? Were you well off? How would you describe it?
My father was an insurance manager, and we had a comfortable time growing up. But sadly, my mum, when I was 16, died of cancer, and I had a stepmother within 6 months. So it wasn't an easy journey. But that's why athletics became very important in my life, because I was able to get outside the family home, which was happy but difficult. And my athletic family supported me all through the next few years.
How did you get the bug? I mean, we all who are lucky enough to have played sport, something snatches our imagination. We say, that's the one for you. For me, was it athletics right from the beginning, or was it sport in general?
Well, I wasn't very good at ball games. I don't have a good eye for a ball. I had a brother who was 3 years older, so he was my motivation because I wanted to challenge him all the time. And it was my headmaster in school saw me playing cricket very badly one day and said, there's an athletic coach looking after the boys. Would you like to go and join them? And it changed my life from that moment on.
And the pentathlon, I mean, that wasn't really a doable event when you started. How did you first get involved? What was your first bit of athletics that you got involved in?
My coach asked me would I like to try a pentathlon. It was the first Northern Ireland Championships in Northern Ireland, and I was 16. And at school we just did sprints and the jumps. So I had to learn two new skills, which were the hurdles and the shot put. And very quickly they became my better events. But I competed against two international hockey players and international athletes, Maeve Kyle and Thelma Hopkins. Thelma Hopkins was a high jump world record holder and played hockey for Ireland, and Maeve ran in the 200 and 400 meters. And I was a 16-year-old, so we competed against each other in the first pentathlon, and Thelma was first, Maeve was second, and I was third. So Dad sent me over to the British Championships, and I got second at the age of 16. So everybody said, that's your event.
But by this stage, I mean, your father not only helped you in your career in that sense, but you were building your own equipment and your own shot put circle and long jump pit.
Yes, my dad gave me a load of sand for my 16th birthday, and bizarrely for my 17th birthday, I got a shot circle, and he made the stop board. And each time I broke the Northern Ireland record in the shot put, the shot weighed light. So he went to the local foundry and got me a proper accurate weight shot so that I could break the Northern Ireland record, which only recently has been broken.
So how much practicing did this involve? I mean, you know, for many youngsters now, certainly the idea of amateur sport is quite strange to comprehend. But you were an amateur and with very rudimentary facilities. How did it work? When did you find the time for practice? How did you fit it in?
Oh, well, I just after school, and then because I had the facilities so close at hand and had a coach who was enthusiastic, it made a difference. And we used to travel all over Northern Ireland to do athletic events. My father was willing to drive me anywhere that I could run or jump or throw, and that was helpful. And then my parents moved to England, but I stayed because I was at training college, trained as domestic science teacher, and I was selected for the Commonwealth Games in 1958 in Cardiff, and I didn't do very well. I was 8th out of 9 in one event and 9th out of 10 in another event, and we did the relay because there was no pentathlon in those days internationally. And we got through to the final in the relay because somebody else had dropped a baton. And as the England team were breaking the world record at the other end of the track, I was passing the final runner, her baton. So we were 100 yards behind. But the experience of living in a village and sharing the sporting memories with other people was enough to keep me inspired.
It sounded so, it does sound, it was so amateur at the time, and yet it also sounded, and reading Ian Roderich's book with you, it sounded also a lot of fun. You were traveling around Northern Ireland, as you say, taking part in any number of events and winning, but was it the taking part that was the most important thing, or how important?
Yeah, I was quite competitive, having had the brother that I wanted to beat. So I just enjoyed the activity and the friendships that were made. And many of the girls that I competed against way back then are still friends today.
And you talked about being a domestic science teacher. Again, many youngsters don't understand that, you have to make ends meet if you're an amateur sports person, and if you're an amateur sports person at the top end, there's an awful squeeze on your time and your effort. How did you balance the two?
Used to train after school, after my teaching day, and I had a friend called Don McBride who was a sprinter, and he and I used to train every Wednesday and helped me with my speed training. Still a good friend today. We used to train on a cinder area, which were hockey pitches, and the train used to go by, and the driver always tooted the horn to say hello and wave at us, which was good. And I just had great fun. And I've only happy memories of those days and the opportunities that came. I was then selected for Great Britain in 1961 as a shot putter. Now, I was only about 11 stone, and competing against people who were 15, 16 and 17 stone made me feel like a midget, but it was the pride of wearing my British vest that was more important than anything. And then the Commonwealth Games in Perth in Australia in 1962, my brother and his wife had emigrated to Australia, so it gave me an opportunity to go and visit them, although I was only 4th in the shot put there. And then, I progressed as a shot putter more than as a pentathlete because there were so few of them. The first time it was included in the Olympic program was 1964. And of course, I was lucky enough to be with Mary Rand, who was a star in her own right. And she won a gold in the long jump, a silver in the pentathlon, and a bronze in the relay. So she got 2nd in the pentathlon in Tokyo, and I was 4th. We were split by 2 Russians.
Was there a burning desire at the time for success? I get the impression from the book that a lot of it, the taking part was there, and the success bit wasn't, as some athletes now are so driven by that desire to be the very best. I get the impression that wasn't necessarily as high on your agenda as perhaps it was when Buster McShane came along, your coach.
Well, Buster recognized that I had more talent than I was showing, so I think he inspired me to higher rewards. I just enjoyed the sport too much, I think, and the friendships that I made.
And Buster McShane, how did you come across him? How did you discover each other, and what was the result of the chemistry?
He was a weightlifter at the Commonwealth Games in Cardiff, and he wrote to all the athletes when we came back to say that he had a gym and he'd be very happy to share his knowledge with us to improve our strength and skills, because the Americans were big into weight training at that time. So a group about 12 of us went along, and I was inspired. I loved it because you didn't get wet. You were indoors doing your training. And the challenges were to raise your skills within the gym, to lift heavier or heavier weights and become stronger, which helped all the skills out on the track. But one day he said to me, you know, I'd love to go and do a shot put session with you. Would you go to the park? And we did. And he recognized that my technique wasn't as good as it should have been, and he had read all the books. So he helped me with that. But then it developed that I was doing more of the pentathlon skills. So we would be out doing the high jump one day and the long jump another day, or sprinting. But in those days, we didn't have the luxury of the foam and landing beds. So we were jumping into wet sand all the time, which wasn't the best either. And the track that I trained on was full of potholes because it had been an experiment. And so most of my training for a good part of my career was in a university gymnasium.
And the application of science to training, you know, I was playing an amateur sport in the 70s, and we had no idea about weight training really, or diet or anything like this. This was just early days for athletics as well, wasn't it?
It was indeed, and he devised a diet for me, particularly for the Commonwealth Games in 1966, where there was still no pentathlon, and we were going to Jamaica, and he encouraged me to gain 2 stone in weight by eating a lot and doing weight training. And I broke the Commonwealth record in a meeting prior to the Games, but on the night of the actual competition, the men's decathlon javelin runway was very close to the shot put circle, so they delayed our competition for an hour. And by the time the competition came, I was beaten into second place, and a New Zealand girl who had come out of retirement, Val Young, beat me, and my coach was fuming because I had made such a big effort, and so had he, to make me a Commonwealth champion. But I was philosophical and said, well, when I go home to Belfast, people will still like me, because I thought there would be an envy if I won the gold. But in fact, next time round, I won 2 gold medals, and people did still like me.
But it's still extraordinary, these tales of frankly amateur facilities and amateur methods and approaches and so on. And it's sometimes very difficult to explain that's how it was. And I don't suppose you had too much resentment about the deal you were dealt at the time.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm not envious at all of the present day athletes, because we had such friendship and fun. You know, we still keep in touch with a lot of my previous friends in sport all over the world, and you can't buy that. You can't buy those friendships or the travel opportunities that we had, and the things that have happened to me since I retired. You know, I've had a wonderful life.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that, looking back at the time that you flourished at sport, it was at the time when this great Cold War rivalry between the Americans and the Russians, and the emergence of the East Germans at the same time, and the lengths to which, from the outside, we looked and we saw the lengths to which they seemed to be going in terms of the shortcuts they might want to take and so on, seemed extraordinary at the time. How did they feel to you when you saw these great big burly women, or these people that you thought used methods that you might consider to be cheating? What did you feel at the time? Was it an unfair playing field?
It was, but you know, you just accepted it. And in today's standard, I mean, there are so many opportunities for people to take drugs, which the East Germans were doing at the time. They were very, very clinically served by medical people to make them the superior race. But we, you know, I used to warm up when we compete against East Germany. I used to warm up with them, to see that I could do the same as they could. But they were full-time athletes, and I was still an amateur, you know, working full-time and doing my sport as a hobby. But you know, the girl who came third in Munich behind Heidi and I, she was crying on the rostrum, and I said to Heidi, why is she so upset? And she said, she's not, she's happy. She's crying with happiness, because if you succeeded in sport in East Germany, you got a flat and a car and a visa that you could travel. So it was very important to them. Whereas we traveled the world happily as British athletes and didn't have that pressure upon us. And we had constant competition against either Germany or Hungary or Poland or America or any country, Netherlands, we had a lot. So we had international competition most weekends. Nowadays, it's only the select few that get onto the tours to be able to compete at that level.
So you were just sort of have kit bag, will travel.
That's right. But then, of course, when I was teaching, the director of education got a bit teased off because I was going away most weekends. And so he made it difficult for me, although the headmistress in the school was very generous and always wanted me to have time to go and enjoy my sport because she knew it was good for the school's reputation. But after 4 years of teaching, I decided I'd give it a wee rest, and with the thought of going back to it and do work for my coach as his secretary so that I had more time, although I did still do a 40-hour week.
So that's where that phrase came from. Belfast secretary wins Munich Olympics. I read that somewhere. That was a headline, which a bit of a disservice, I'd have thought. But yeah, that sort of way of living and the way of coaching and training and balancing sport, in contrast to the Eastern European ways of doing it, meant that there were lots and lots of innuendos and stories flying about, and the need, therefore, to test. I mean, I don't suppose down the years there were too many drugs tests, but they became a way of life for you. And this sounded awfully humiliating, sex tests as well.
I always say that I have a certificate on my bedroom wall to prove that I'm a woman. They weren't the best days, but we suspected there were cheats, and our team manager was very keen that we should all prove that we were female.
Yeah, but it sounded incredibly undignified.
Yeah, I don't like to talk too much about it.
Yeah, terribly undignified. And yet now, of course, they can do it with hair tests and blood tests and that sort of thing, which is at least a lot more dignified than it was. But even so, that suspicion that it wasn't quite fair, it didn't really eat up to you. You still went away thinking, I can compete, I can win.
Yeah, I suppose we were aware of all the cheats that was going on, but you know, that happens, and they've got to live with their consciences. We were clear, and we knew that we were doing it to the best of our ability, without any help of drugs or.
Yeah, you mentioned Mary Rand, and this was the Munich. We're going to move on to your great success. Was your third Olympics, so you already tried and come up short in 2 Olympics, and Mary Rand had stolen the limelight for a fair amount of the time. Was there ever a feeling that you were destined to be the bridesmaid?
Could have been, but then after winning 2 gold medals at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh in 1970, I realized how good it was, the feeling of being successful, and I wanted a little bit more, and I knew time was running out for me. So I took a year's rest, and then on the date, which was the 3rd of September in 1971, I decided I'm going to win the gold in Munich, and went to Crystal Palace with my coach, and he had an old cine camera, and we watched all these people doing the Fosbury flop, and we sat there for about 2.5 hours, and then people were fading away, and he said, go and get your tracksuit on and have a try. And I jumped higher than I'd ever jumped before. because of course I had the landing bed.
Yeah.
So that changed the whole scene for me, because from jumping an average of 5'7" in the pentathlon, I cleared 5'11 3/4 the night of my success in Munich. So it was that really changed my skills. Although many of the events that I did were as good as some of the athletes that are doing today.
The Fosbury flop, again, that's a name, you know, we were growing up at the time. Suddenly this revolutionary thing's arrived, the Fosbury flop, and we sort of know what it was. But to you, it was a complete eye-opener. Can you describe it for those that maybe don't know what the Fosbury flop is and was, and how it changed your abilities and in fact the whole perception of the high jump?
Well, everybody does it now, and there's nobody does the Eastern cutoff or the scissors or any of the events, the styles that we used to do. Mine was more like a donkey bounce over the bar, was very undignified. But I had very strong legs with all my weight training.
Yeah.
So you approach the bar and take off high and then bend over the bar and land on your shoulders. And it just seemed to suit me because of my strength. And I did all that in the gymnasium at the university because we didn't have high jump beds outdoors at my track, at the track that was the one I trained on.
Yeah.
And so it suited me. And I met Dick Fosbury some years later and said I owed my gold medal to him because the difference it made in points was so vital. Although I was the strongest shot putter that ever competed in the pentathlon, and I was a very good hurdler. My weaknesses were the long jump and the 200 meters.
But the Fosbury flop enabled you to cross a barrier. But you also mentioned your attitude. September the 3rd, I think you said it was. Did you flick a switch? How did you suddenly decide this is the one, I'm going to do it, or was there?
Absolutely. I was 33 by then. You see, Alastair, I knew that I couldn't go on for another 4 years.
Right.
And when you're competing against 16, 18, 20-year-olds, you don't have the same flexibility as you get older. But I had all that experience behind me, and I had the strength and the speed. I just needed to get my head in the right place to make sure that I was going to win. And I knew Heidi and Berglinde by reputation. I had met Heidi a few times, but Berglinde was the European champion. And when we moved into the village, I don't know why, but I went round to find her to see what she looked like. She was very tall and skilled. But I looked at her and I thought, yeah, I can beat you. Although Heidi was the star of the show in Munich, she was the inspiration of a lot of the publicity surrounding those games because she was born in Munich. So I had to have a lot of respect for her. But I was only 5th in the rankings. So I was very lucky that I did 4 personal bests out of 5 events.
I was going to say
quite extraordinary.
Everything fell into place for you.
It did.
What did it all fall into place as planned, or you drew up this chart in September the year before and said, "This is how I'm going to get my gold medal"? Did it happen that way, or did it?
Well, there were a few hiccups in the sense that the night before they gave us the draw for the hurdles. And I found that Anne Wilson, who was also from Great Britain, had been put into a faster heat than I was. And I was quite angry because I had run faster times than her. And so I wrote a letter to Arthur Gold, who was our team manager, complaining. And it was probably my way of building up the aggression for the competition to come. And apparently the latest times that I had done had not been fed into the computer, so it was nobody's fault, really. But it made me run faster.
Why was it important to be in a faster heat?
because the other runners who are better than you, they bring you along, but also the first event is the hurdles, and if you make a good start, it helps you for the continuation of the other 4 events. So I ran a very good heat, and Bodner, who was the German girl that just beat me by a very small margin, we both broke the Olympic record for the hurdles in that event, and I had good points. It was a good score.
So the other heat was supposed to be faster then, was it?
It was,
right.
But I think ours was the fastest in the end.
Brilliant.
So it didn't
matter. Then you had the shot, which, as you say, was your banker event.
Yeah, I knew I was the strongest of all the pentathletes, but you only have 3 tries, and if you don't hit it right, you can fail. But I did an average 1 for the first put, and then I knew I had to put every effort into it. And part of my training was to yell as I put the shot. And of course that causes a little bit of interest in for the spectators, because they think, what's going on here? But nobody follows a pentathlon that closely in those days particularly, and so it created more of an interest in the event than it would have if I hadn't been so rude and shouted so loudly as I
we loved it. We supported it.
And I did a very, very good 16 meters 40, which was very good for a pentathlete then. So then we had to go back to the village and hang around for hours before the high jump that evening, and I was restless because I wanted to get on with it. My preference for a pentathlon was to do it all in one day, get over and done with, So anyway, we went back in the evening, and I failed, I think, at 5'7", not very good in records. And my coach was furious, and he was in the crowd, and he was, get up and run and get yourself motivated. And I did. I ran around the bend a few times and came back and cleared it on the 3rd, and then went up and up and up until it was nearly 6 feet. And everybody else was out by then, well out. And there was only one other athlete in the stadium competing, and that was Wolfgang Nordvik an East German in the pole vault. And there was a crowd of British people stood around waiting for me, and Wolfgang would clear a vault and would all cheer, and then I would go and they'd all cheer me. And it was the first time in my life that I'd had an audience in the pentathlon, and I'm very pleased that they were all there to support me and help me over the bar.
To a personal best.
Yes, and well in the lead after the first 3 events.
And so a quiet night's sleep.
Yep. Well, it's hard to sleep when you're you've 2 events to come, and they're your weaker events, But I kicked and thrashed and got up and pinned on my numbers for the next day and got myself ready. And we had the long jump in the morning, and then we had to wait till the evening for the 200 meters. So it was a long 2 days of competition. Anyway, I did a reasonable long jump for me, just under 20 feet. But then Heidi jumped out of her skin, and she had broken the world record. So the final event was the 200 meters that evening, and I knew from my coach's calculations that I had to run faster than I'd ever run in the 200 meters before. And so I ran scared, and I won by a 10th of a second out of 5 events over 2 days, out of 4,800 points. It was like that, the tiniest margin.
It was extraordinary moment in sporting history. And as you say, just a 10th of a second. Your coach made the calculations. Nowadays, we've got algorithms and computers and goodness knows what that would make the calculations in the blink of an eye, but presumably it was a lot more convoluted for
it
your
was.
coach.
And of course, then the result took so long to come through because there weren't the computers that were accurate. And because it was so close, they had to check and check and check again. And of course, because Heidi was the local girl and the expectation was that she would win, they had to be very accurate because there would have been so much criticism had it not been accurate. But I was back in Munich this year, in the latter part of last year, doing a documentary about the games. And I was imaginingly looking up at the scoreboard when I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it was Heidi. Oh. As had happened on the night of my success, and it was glorious to see her again. And we have remained friends all these years, and we hugged and hugged and hugged each other, and then we had dinner in the evening together, which was lovely.
Well, the joy on your face is one of those lasting images we all keep from our youth. It was just such a beautiful moment, and made even better for you by the arrival of your dad.
Absolutely. I had no idea he was there. Oh, and he went up to the BBC and said, "I'm Mary Peter's father." And they said, "Prove it." So he got out his passport, and they couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe it either, because Dad had supported me all those years ago, but had been living in Australia for some years. And he said to my brother, I'm going to see Mary win the gold." And it was remarkable that he was there and came out on live television to surprise me. Oh, dear. But the joy for me was that I had some good news to take home to Northern Ireland, because in 1972 we were at the height of the Troubles, as we called them, and there were over 500 people died that year, and it was a difficult time. And so for me to bring back the gold medal gave people something to cheer about for a change.
But you received a death threat at the time of receiving the medal, didn't you?
I did. It came through the BBC. I never actually saw the threat, but I was told that whoever had phoned in had said that if I went home to Belfast, that I would be shot and that my flat would be bombed. So naturally, my father wanted me to go back with him to Australia. He was fearful for my life, but I never felt anybody would want to harm me. So I said, I'm going home.
Gosh,
I'm so glad I did.
Well, I think Northern Ireland is so glad you did, but the temptation must have been there. I mean, just cut and run. Your brother was in Australia. Your father
had emigrated in 1960.
All of your family was in Australia. Surely it would have made much more sense to say, I'm going somewhere safer.
I know, but you don't know about the people of Northern Ireland. They're really warm and humorous and generous to sporting heroes, and I have no regrets that I stayed and have been able to help the next generation of young sports people develop their skills.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the Troubles then, and we've been lucky enough to see recently the Kenneth Branagh film Belfast.
Yeah.
How awful difficult was it living in the Troubles at that time?
It wasn't easy. I had to take 2 buses to get to the track because I didn't have a car. And very often on the first bus journey into the city, I would hear bombs going off. But for some reason, I never turned back. I always kept going and went to the track. I knew people that died in the bombings, and it was a tragic time, but there was always that humor, and I loved the Belfast film because my father lived in Belfast for 2 years when we were still in Liverpool, so it was a reversal of Kenneth Branagh's experience. And when we came to live in Northern Ireland, the people are extraordinarily generous and kind, and the countryside is absolutely beautiful. And I sound like a tourist board talking about it, but there's more beauty than there is harm and hurt, although there were so many innocent people being killed at the time. And it wasn't easy to live here. It wasn't easy to journey on buses or trains, but life went on, and when you see the documentaries, it horrifies you now that you lived through it. But you know, going into the city, you had to go through barriers and raise your arms to be examined, and your handbags and your shopping bags were opened. And but you just got used to it and just did it. And I'm so glad I'm still here, and that things are so much better now.
Yeah, and a sort of side bar to that, the idea of the violence and so on. Like, you'd only just won your gold medal, and then the massacre of the games happened, didn't it? In the terrorists breaking in and shooting some of the Israeli team members.
That's right.
That was around the corner from you, presumably.
It was, and you know, I hadn't realized at the time, of course, that Heidi was Jewish and that there had been threats to her life. So there was a parallel between the pair of us, because she also opened a couple of health clubs after she retired, and I had a health club for many years, 25 years. But, you know, I wanted to go back when I was there last autumn to pay my respects to the Jewish people who suffered at that time and lost lives. And they are building a lovely memorial to the Jewish coaches and athletes that died in those games. And of course, Munich were ashamed of what happened, because they had wanted to make the games, the friendly games following on the Berlin Olympics, where Hitler had been in the stadium, and Jesse Owens made such lovely statements, but they weren't great games in the history of the Olympics. So, but Heidi always said that, you know, Munich is in Bavaria, and Bavaria doesn't think of themselves as German. And so they were a bit too relaxed with the security, because they wanted them to be friendly. And that's how the Black September movement were able to get into the village.
And for an athlete in the village, I mean, your event had finished, so in a sense you're on downtime, but under heightened security, presumably.
Absolutely. People were fearful for me, particularly because I was Irish, from an Irish situation, and they wanted to get me out of the village as quickly as possible. So after a couple of days, I was brought home to Belfast, but I had detectives accompany me on the plane home, which I was unaware of at the time, and a fearful welcome when they got me home because of the threat. But I had no fear. I was on a high, having achieved what I had with a world record and winning the gold medal.
But even so, I mean, shortly afterwards, a reminder of how precarious life is. Your coach died very soon after, didn't he?
6 months later, sadly, Buster was killed in a car accident, and that was very hard to bear, because he had been, not only worked for him, but he had been the person behind my success. And because we're celebrating my 50th anniversary a lot this year, I have put a seat at the track near a statue of myself, which says, in memory of Buster McShane, who made an average athlete into an Olympic champion.
I think you had a lot to do with that, Mary. But but yes, I mean, so you've won the gold medal. Your coach dies, and did the heart go out of athletics? And did you feel it was time to go to hang up? Yeah, I know you did one more Commonwealth Games, didn't you?
The reason for that was because when the night that I won my gold medal, I was taken to a restaurant in the mountains by Derek Ibbotson, who was the Puma rep. I wore Puma shoes, and I had a phone call in the kitchen during the meal from Malcolm Brodie, who was the sports editor of the Belfast Telegraph, and he said he wanted to talk about my success and how it had all gone. And he said, "We'd like to set up a fund to commemorate your success. What would you like?" And foolishly, I said a track, because the one that I had trained on had been in such bad condition. So from the night that I won, I started collecting money to resurface the track. And it took me 3 years of hard graft, going to schools and youth clubs and Rotary clubs and women's institutes and standing at factory gates collecting the money. But eventually we were able to raise the money for the track. But because Buster had died, I trained with a chap called Mike Bull, who was a pole vaulter. And he and I decided that in memory of Buster, we would win the pentathlon and decathlon at the next Commonwealth Games, which were in Christchurch, New Zealand, as a tribute to Buster, our coach. Now, I was spending more time collecting money than I was training, and I really wasn't in the best order to go to another games, but we did. We were both successful, and luckily for me, while I was at those games in Christchurch, I met John Moore, who owned Littlewoods football pools, and he said, "I know you're collecting money for a track. When you go home, write to me, and I'll send you some money." And I had raised about £6,000 at that time, which in today's money would be about 60,000, I suppose. And he sent me a check for 5. So there I was up to 11,000, and that stimulated me to keep going and to keep. And eventually, I think the track cost about £70,000. But Northern Ireland government said, if you raise 30,000, we'll give you 30,000 to equal it. So made it easier.
It seems incredible, though, that from this distance of time, that Belfast didn't have a world-class track at that time. There were other cities as well who didn't, but that Belfast, that Northern Ireland, shouldn't have a world-class track seems bizarre at this distance of time.
I know, but then we were going through the troubles, and sport, although they opened 8 indoor arenas, it wasn't as easy for people to travel across the city to compete. But I got support from all quarters to help raise the money for the track, and I want to ensure it's owned by Belfast City Council now because of the upkeep of it, which I'm very grateful for, and they have upgraded it. But I want them to always remember that it was the people that built the track.
Yeah, no lottery in those days. No lottery to whistle up and get some funds for.
No.
And the Mary Peters Trust that followed on from that. What was the logic and the thought behind the Mary Peters Trust?
Well, at the same time as collecting for the track, a businessman came to me and said he would like to set up a charity to raise money for the next generation of young people. And I couldn't call it the Mary Peters Trust because we still had the Mary Peters track raising money. So we called it the Ulster Sports Trust. And for many, many years, we raised enough money to send a few people off to give them more experience in sport. Once they got to a certain level, they would have lottery funding, but it's getting to that level. And because there's the water between us, the competition was more expensive for Northern Ireland people. So over 45 years, we've raised enough money to help over 4,000 athletes with bursaries, boxers and hockey players, and with Paralympians, and Carl Frampton, the boxing champion, and we had 2 gold medalists in hockey from the Seoul Olympics, and we've had a great deal of success, Olympic, world, European, Commonwealth, Irish, British champions, and we don't distinguish between them, whether they're able-bodied or have a disability.
And how does somebody apply for that? They have to be obviously from Northern Ireland. Do you check every application personally, or how does it work?
No, I have a selection committee, but they all have each governing body has a liaison officer, so they would put the need that the athletes or hockey players require in a list, and then of course the selection committee decide on how much money they will get, and we give as much as we possibly can to make sure that we have young people traveling the world as our ambassadors and progressing into sport. So this year we have special for the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham.
Yeah. So where would you say is the future for that? Because you're going to carry on doing it. Is it a self-perpetuating thing, or does it need Mary Peters to be there to continue making these grants?
We have invested some money. I raised $1 million a couple of years ago to make sure that when I'm no longer here, that we'll still be able to carry on. And we have a very enthusiastic board that administers the charity. But I'm still the prime mover in getting funding. And during the pandemic of the COVID, we suffered as every charity did because we weren't able to do the fundraising. So that's why this year, my 50th anniversary is going to be so important, to raise as much as we possibly can, not only in money, but in profile, to make sure that nobody is deprived of the opportunity of becoming a champion.
And you've been a champion, not just for the people of Northern Ireland, but as this book, Passing the Torch, about women in sport. How important is it for women to set the example, to have role models such as yourself and such as these amazing athletes that you wrote about and were written about in the book? How important is it for women to be involved in sport?
I think it's vital that young women realize that they have the opportunity, and particularly in soccer, we have a team in Northern Ireland now going to the Euros next year. We have some of the Irish hockey girls that won a silver medal in the World Championships. 4 of them were from Northern Ireland. The netball team has qualified for the Commonwealth Games, and our sport has risen enormously. World sport has, for women, and with Emma Raducanu doing so well in tennis, and I mean, the tennis courts are packed out now because of her success, not only in playing a wonderful game, but in the sponsorship that she's been able to attract because of her sport. We still need the media to raise a bit more of a profile. If you buy a newspaper and get 8 pages covering men's sport and maybe, 6 lines or 10 lines about women, unless there's something unusual happens. And I just think that that it is better now than it has ever been for women in sport, but there's still not equal opportunities.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see the huge attendances at things like the Barcelona football. I think they've got 93,000 there, and the Six Nations rugby has been bringing in the bigger crowds, and women's football is going very well. What do you think is needed to push them on to the next stage, to push the coverage of women's sport and the participation on?
I think journalists need to write more in the newspapers about them. I think we're getting much more coverage on television and radio. It's an evolution, I think, and I think the future will see us on more equal terms. There are so many young people playing sport now. They were deprived during the COVID period, but they're back out there again now. And for example, the Paralympics, there are so many participants in that, at both Winter and Summer Olympics. And they were, until 1984, when Cliff Morgan got coverage for the Paralympics, there was never any coverage in the newspapers. And they're so extraordinarily skilled, and I get so much pleasure out of seeing them doing well. And we got our first from one of our athletes that we supported, Kelly Gallagher. She was the first British skier to win a gold medal at the Winter Olympics.
We as sports people often feel like we're talking to the converted and saying why we think sport is good. You presumably come across people who say, I don't do sport, or sport isn't for me. What would you say are the benefits of a more open approach to sport and the participation in sport?
I think mental health is vital in keeping yourself physically fit because it helps the mental attitude. I think that the opportunities of traveling and friendship are so important in life. And it's not everybody that's good at sport. I wasn't good until I got the help and the opportunities and the coaching that I did. But if you can't sing, like I can't, sport is a way of enjoying your out of work time, and you know, with the park runs and the couch to 5K events to encourage women to get out and play sport. The book that you talk about, Passing the Torch, I gathered that information because there were only 5 books on the sporting bookshelves in the shops to cover women's sport, and there were over 100 for men. So the more people that write about the joys of participating in sport, the more young people will take part.
It's a brilliant message, and we've just got time to read out a couple of the questions and comments from the chat room. Mary, didn't Queen's University have a new track at the top of Malone Road in the mid-1960s?
Yes, they did, and it was a man who had a vision and laid this first synthetic track, but it was like tarmac cover with a rubber surface, and of course it was porous, so when the water went through and it froze during the winter, it popped the surface off the track, and that's why it became full of potholes. And that is now the Mary Peters track, which is
it's that one.
A Mondeo track, yeah, and it is in the most natural amphitheatre setting, and I get great pride in going to visit. And a little girl got out of her mummy's car the other day, and because there's a statue of me at the track and she's had a photograph taken a few times, she ran across to me and she said, "Are you the real Mary Peters?"
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's so inspirational, and all the comments are coming through. So good to know that the Trust helps young athletes from less privileged backgrounds. Thank you. So people just come to you, and you can help anybody, really.
Yes, if we have to rely on their liaison officers, that they are qualified enough to excel in their particular sports, that we feel that they could get some help. We have a young girl called Sophie Early, who is a table tennis player. We've been helping since she was 11 years of age. She's now on the British squad training in Nottingham, and her family have all moved across to England, and she's one of the top players in Europe, and I'm hoping she'll get to the Commonwealth Games and show her skills there.
Another brilliant example, and somebody to watch out for. We've got to come to the end of this, Mary, unfortunately. Just a couple of other comments. A great interview, says Jean Joyce. I remember the excitement around Mary's achievements, and we certainly all do. It's one of those great moments when you're watching on television. Thank you so much from Gita Garg. Mary, you're inspirational, beautiful, and all round lovely. And thank you so much, Mary, for sparing the time with us for Sporting Memory and for Goldster. Wish you all the very best in the future, and wish Mary Peters Trust all success in the future. But thank you so much for sparing the time with us, Mary.
Been lovely. Thank you so much, Alastair.